Hello, I am Enrique Quesada, and this is the Judy Lay Allen Mexico Center podcast from the Center for the United States and Mexico at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy. It's December, and for the third year in a row, we look back at what happened this year with the Mexican economy, public health, elections, and the binational relationship with the United States. And as is customary, we also look at the expectations for the coming year. If you've been following the podcast for some time, you may know that I usually sit down to talk with our center's director, Tony Payan, for this annual Roundup. And this year is no exception. A quick note, we recorded this conversation just before the latest COVID-19 variant, Omicron, made the news. So any references you will hear regarding a potential variant do not mention Omicron explicitly. Okay, so without further ado, here's my conversation with Tony Payan. Tony Payan, Director of the Center for the United States and Mexico. It's a pleasure to meet with you again in your office and ask you some questions in person for the podcast.
Right. It's been a while.
Yeah.
Glad to be back.
The year's almost done. It's been quite a year. And as we have done in years past, I think is a good time to take stock of what has happened in Mexico this past year with the pandemic, the economy, elections, the binational relationship, and see what awaits us for 2022. Right, so dealing with some of the same challenges probably in 2022 that the country dealt in 2021. So anyway, let's start with 2021 and the COVID-19 pandemic. The impacts have been both on the public health aspect, but also the economy. I want to point out that Mexico now has vaccinated close to 50% of its population, and so the government has administered a variety of vaccines to be able to achieve this number. But yeah, what has happened in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic and both, in terms of public health, but the economy as well?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that we need to think about when it comes to Mexico and the pandemic. Obviously, it's an unfortunate thing for many different countries. In the United States, we also experienced, over 600,000 people dead. So it's quite tragic. Lots of families lost loved ones. Mexico is not the exception. There's about 300,000 people dead, as acknowledged by the government. And of course, many estimates put the number at closer to 600,000, twice as many. That's quite tragic for a country that has, 130 million people. So I think that's the minimum that we have to think about, the number of people that just died because of the pandemic. Why is it that Mexico has paid that high price? It's because the pandemic was mishandled. I think it was completely bungled by the president, no leadership. The president, much like Trump, at a different time, questioned, masks, questioned the value of the vaccine, questioned all kinds of social distancing measures. So the government, at the end of the day, I think, just decided to let the virus burn through the population, and perhaps they were betting on herd immunity without saying so. And so lots of people got infected. Many even didn't even know. Testing was very low. They didn't want to test people because they didn't want to know the dimensions of the pandemic. So they acknowledge under 4 million infections. Well, obviously there were many more, but there were no tests available. And of course, a collapse in the healthcare system, not just because of the pandemic and the number of people that crowded the public healthcare system, but also because what you had is essentially a disinvestment in the healthcare system, the dismantling of the Seguro Popular, which is a popular insurance program, government insurance program, and of course a budget, much smaller budget for healthcare. So in terms of health, I think Mexico has just been a disaster throughout 2021. There's no other way to put it. I wish I had better news for you, but that's it. That's what it is.
What about the economy? What have been the impacts on the economy?
Yeah, this is another thing that the president, because he has insisted, Mr. López Obrador, on what he calls a Republican austerity budget, which is essentially we're not going to spend money. So there hasn't been any expenditures on healthcare, on education, on public infrastructure, and on public services. The president has essentially two budget priorities, I think. One is social programs, cash transfers, without any real monitoring, without any real ensuring that corruption doesn't penetrate those programs, and no targeted programs. I mean, at the end of the day, they just give out the cash, no questions asked, by categories. It doesn't matter if you need it or not, and so it's a lot of waste of money. And the second priority of the president are his, pharaonic major projects like the Dos Bocas refinery in his home state of Tabasco, the Mayan train, which goes around the Yucatan Peninsula, and the Mexico City International Airport, the kind of new airport after he canceled the big airport. And that's it. That's where he's putting the money. Oh, also Pemex, subsidizing Pemex, a heavily indebted company with a debt of $120 billion. And that's where the money's going. The entire budget is going to his priorities in terms of infrastructure and the social programs. And so Mexico's services are deteriorating, its infrastructure is deteriorating, and its investment in education and healthcare is way low. And there were no programs to help small and mid-sized businesses to survive the pandemic, to keep the employees. So there were millions of jobs lost, and there's been some recovery, but mostly because many people moved into the informal sector. The income per capita in Mexico collapsed from an estimated 15,000 pesos to about a month to about 8,000 pesos. So Mexicans are overall poorer. And, of course, there's an estimated 4 to 5 million people who fell in abject poverty in the country. So at the end of the day, I think the balance is not good economically. Two things, I think, are keeping Mexico afloat. One is its exports. The export system, surprisingly, has really kept up, especially the automotive industry, manufactured goods. I think that kind of shows the legacy of what the president despises, and that's the neoliberal system, which is Mexico's participation in manufacturing integrated chains with Canada and North America, in North America in general. But really, at the end of the day, the president didn't invest any money in holding the economy, protecting the economy from the pandemic, and the economy is recovering slowly. The second thing that's I guess holding the economy is the remittances, and we don't know where they're going to end up. I think $45 billion maybe at the end of 2021. That helps families directly. I mean, it's a family-to-family aid, individual in the U.S., migrant in the U.S. to family in Mexico. That helps a lot. If it were not for the remittances and the exports of this despised neoliberal sector, Mexico's economy would already be in shambles. And so at the end of the day, I think the bet on Mexico's economy in 21 was a poor one, and that's where we are right now, with lots of jobs lost, an informal economy that's much greater, and low investment, and an economy that's barely holding up.
So in addition to all of this, there was also an important political event. There were midterm elections on June 6th to elect new representatives for the lower chamber of Congress. There were gubernatorial races and renewal of local legislatures. Overall, Morena the party of the president continues to be the largest party, but they no longer have a majority.
A qualified majority
in the lower chamber that would allow them to pass some of the larger reforms that they wanted to pass.
Right.
So where does this leave the government and his agenda, and where does this leave the opposition?
Well, it's always been my, opinion that Mexicans are much smarter as an electorate than people give them credit for. I think that every single midterm election since 1997 has shown that the president's party loses seats, and this was no exception. They didn't lose enough seats to lose a simple majority, but they lost the qualified majority, which, as you mentioned, prevents the president's coalition from passing any constitutional reforms. And that kind of protects the Constitution. That kind of holds the basic barrier to anything that the president wants to touch next. So they, I think they maintained, together with their allies, the Green Party and the Workers' Party, 277 out of 500 deputies in the chamber. in the lower chamber in Congress, the Mexican Congress. And I think so they have a majority. That's how they were able to pass the 2022 federal budget with the priorities that I mentioned a little bit earlier, pretty much untouched. And I think they obviously lost enough that they're not going to be able to make a whole lot of changes, except through legislation and regulatory action, administrative action. That's where they are going to be in the coming year, I think. They lost a couple of important governorships, I think. Querétaro and Chihuahua went to the PAN. San Luis Potosí went to the Green Party. And, of course, Nuevo León, a very important governorship, went to the MC. And they lost Mexico City. The opposition won 9, almost 11 of the 16 boroughs in Mexico City. That was an important accomplishment, and I think that hurt the president quite a bit because he was not a very happy man after the elections. He thought he was going to sweep. So I think it leaves the opposition unified. At the end of the day, the president's coalition lost 10 million votes. You have to remember in 2018, the president got his coalition, the three parties, the Greens, the Workers' Party, and Morena, got 30 million votes. In 2021, they got 20 million votes. They lost 10 million votes. That's a substantial loss. 1/3 of their voters defected. And the opposition, together with the MC, PAN, PRI, PRD, and MC, managed 52% of the vote. Again, I think something is wrong with the formula in Mexico because, the Morena, the Green, and the Workers' Party, they have 277 out of 500, but they only got 48% of the vote. So there's something wrong with the formula. We'll have to figure out what's going on there with because the numbers don't match the total votes. They should have lost even the qualified majority, but they have it by 27 votes. At the end of the day, I think the opposition held together as an electoral coalition. They won 52% of the vote. If you include the MC, the party that won Monterrey in the state of Nuevo León. And it seems that they held together as a legislative coalition sufficiently to stop the energy constitutional reform that the president wanted in November of 2021. And that was quite an accomplishment that the coalition held, the opposition coalition held together to deny the president a constitutional reform means that maybe in tatters, maybe, held by pins, but they're together. And so we'll see what happens over the next 2 years before the 2024 presidential race starts.
Right. As a political science nerd, I think of the Duan formula, so it favors large parties, and Morena is the largest party, so they end up getting more than their proportion of votes.
Exactly, because they only got, I think, 35% of the vote, 34%, I think, and they probably ended up with about 42% of the seats. Yeah.
Is the reform you mentioned the electricity reform?
That is correct. It was a constitutional change, important because it was going to essentially retrench the entire electricity production and distribution sector folded back into the government, eliminate all the independent regulatory commissions, and exclude any private and foreign investment in the electric sector. And, of course, very tragically, essentially eliminate all opportunities for renewables in the electricity sector. Which would have made Mexico essentially not meet its commitments under climate change arrangements globally in which Mexico participates. The president was denied that, fortunately. We'll see. He wants to bring it up again, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, it seems like the discussions are delayed until April of next year.
Right.
As you said, many wonder if it's just dead by now. And lastly, for 2021, in terms of the binational relationship, President López Obrador traveled to Washington with other Mexican officials to meet with their American and Canadian counterparts. So maybe this is more of the trilateral North American relationship. This summit was common before Trump's presidency. then it went on hiatus, and now it's back. So there seems to at least be some goodwill of like, we want to meet and discuss some important issues like trade and immigration. What can we expect from this?
Well, they met in November, I think, I forget the date, November 17th or something like that, just a few weeks back. And my guess is that there were some good news and some bad news, mostly bad news, but there was some good news. Like you mentioned, the three amigos, the so-called three amigos, the leaders of Canada, the United States, and Mexico, had not met since 2016 when Trump came into office. He completely did away with any multilateral, arrangements. He didn't like them. And so that kind of got frozen out. But I think President Biden decided to put the framework back on the table and invite the partners, the North American partners, and sort of give some CPR to the idea of a North American platform and sort of try to deal with issues kind of regionally and jointly. And I think that's the good news, the fact that this framework is back alive, it's back on the table, and that we can use it as a point of reference to do public policy regionally and perhaps even to reconcile some of the disagreements among all three countries. Some are bilateral, Canada-U.S. or Canada-Mexico, and some are Mexico-U.S. Or U.S. with Mexico, and some of them are regional. And I think those are all important ways to kind of carry out some issue linkage and get all these issues on the table and perhaps cede on some and win on others and lose on others and things like that. So that's the good news, I think. The bad news is the issues are many. I mean, the implementation of the USMCA has gotten very complicated. The U.S. is very much bent on Buy American, Hire American. There are some subsidies in the president's legislation at the end of the year that subsidize the acquisition of electrical cars by consumers at the exclusion of Canadian cars. There's also some protection measures that President Biden has in place and left in place. You have to remember, he has not removed any of the tariffs that President Trump imposed, for example, on Canadian steel. So there are some issues there to work out. I think there are some issues with agriculture. Mexico is imposing or banning glyphosate, I think, which is a chemical used in fertilizers, and without giving proper notice. And that is going to, not allow some U.S. agricultural products to go into Mexico because they violate that rule. There's all kinds of issues like that. Not to delve too much into it, you can see that it gets to be very complicated. Cars, agricultural, steel, all kinds of issues like that. Another issue, of course, has to do with immigration. What is Mexico's role in stopping these waves of immigrants towards the United States? And another one is, of course, security. The United States surpassed 100,000 overdoses this year in 2021. And Mexico surpassed 105,000 people dead because of the war on drugs and organized crime. And yet Mexico is denying DEA agents from the U.S. Visas to operate in Mexico. Mexico doesn't want to cooperate with the United States, but fentanyl keeps making its way through Mexico and into the United States. Organized crime keeps ravaging through Mexico at a very high level. So there's very little cooperation on those issues. So lots and lots of very difficult issues on trade, on security, on immigration, and of course climate change, which President Biden wants to push, and then of course finally is the energy sector, where Mexico wants to reserve for itself all investment on energy at the expense of a lot of commitments that Mexico has made, and at the expense of a lot of American investors. So good news, the framework is back. Bad news, the issues are many and thorny, and they're going to have to be dealt with one by one over the next months.
Okay, well, talking about what will need to happen, that was 2021. What about 2022? Let's go through some of these same areas. So with the pandemic, I would hope that the worst is behind us. As I said, the vaccinations rate, the vaccination is going up. Almost half of Mexicans are fully vaccinated now. I don't know when the boosters will begin to happen there in Mexico. But what do you think we can expect for 2022?
I don't expect the pandemic to get much better. There may be other waves. I mean, some people are expecting an additional wave in the winter. We'll see what happens in January, February, March, and if there are any other variants that will appear and will just ravage through the population. Boosters are needed because we know that vaccines kind of wear out over time, and so we need to make sure that we vaccinate ourselves. I mean, we do it with the flu every year.
Right.
It should pretty much happen like that with the coronavirus. So we're going to have to keep that up, and Mexico obviously doesn't have enough vaccines. Many Mexicans are now being allowed to come back into the United States, but not those who had the Chinese and the Russian vaccines. Right. So that kind of creates it kind of irks many Mexicans that they don't have the ability to travel as much as they want to. So Mexico has to get the right vaccines and to get to the right amount. I know that Mexico is probably by the end of 2021, I guess, applied about 130 million vaccines in, like you said, maybe half the population. But there's a lot of people that are unvaccinated in Mexico. Right. And so if there's another variant and it kind of goes through population, it can still cause a lot of damage. Just to say, I expect in 2022 that the coronavirus pandemic will continue to create problems in Mexico, perhaps at a lower rate, at a lower level, but I think it's going to continue to stumble through the pandemic and then eventually out maybe by 2023. But 2022, I wouldn't say looks an incredibly better year. It looks better mostly because this thing is wearing itself out, but not necessarily because Mexico has a strategy.
And what about the economic recovery now that more people are vaccinated? Maybe what places are recovering? What can we expect in terms of the economy?
Well, I mean, the most important measure I think is economic growth. The Mexican economy had tanked by I think almost 1% in 2019 and 8.5% in 2020, and it may grow. It was expected to grow 6% in 2021, which wouldn't be a recovery of that almost 10% lost. Right. I mean, it would still be well below the 2018 levels. But it looks like the number keeps being revised down. It has slowed down. There's no investment. Money is leaving Mexico. Billions, tens of billions of dollars are leaving Mexico, both money that Mexicans have and are moving abroad, and, of course, investment because the business environment in Mexico is so uncertain that people are just moving their money out, their capital out, and even putting on hold important investment projects. And that, I think, is hurting the recovery in Mexico. If Mexico just simply provided certainty, business environment certainty and protection of investment and capital, I think the recovery would be much faster, and Mexico would be back in a very good place. But because the president doesn't want to, he's naturally suspicious of private actors and investment. He's not going to make it easy, and so the recovery will just drag along. It'll be, even if the economy grows at a good clip in 2022, we'll see 2018 levels in 2023. And some people suspect that we may not see those levels until 2025 and even 2026, because remember, the population continues to grow. The informal sector is still there, and we need to get those people out of the informal sector into the formal sector, into the informal economy. That is, and I think that's going to be very difficult. So Mexico measures employment as anybody that is making a buck, even if it is just selling, corn or whatever in the streets. And as long as you're making a little money, you're employed as far as the Mexican government is concerned. Mm-hmm. And so that's going to be the economy. It's going to be, a two-speed economy. One inserted, global manufacturing integrated, and one local. Concentrated in low productivity in Mexico, and the recovery is going to be slow and painful, I think. So at the end of the day, I think the López Obrador sexenio will be a lost sexenio. That's not his promise. He promised 6%. I think it'll be a lost sexenio, 6-year term.
So this next one is an interesting one. It has to do with politics. The President López Obrador, he advocated while a candidate that he would institute, and he had this recall election at the kind of midpoint of his mandate. So that was supposed to be 2021. It didn't happen, but it is going to happen in 2022. It seems like it will take place on April 10 if everything goes according to plan. What do we expect to happen? He's lost some support in the midterm elections, and now he comes into 2022. This may also distract from other priorities that the government has. What do you think?
Well, Mr. Lopez Obrador loves these dumb political games. They're very profitable for him. But look, you're a political scientist. You remember what happened in August of 2021. They called for some sort of ersatz referendum on trying the ex-presidents, former presidents. 7% of people participated. It was a fiasco. It was a total collapse. People were not interested. I think the president is completely miscalculating, calling on people to show up at the polls again. We don't know when. First, it was going to be in March 2022. Now it's going to be in April, because he wants the INE, the Electoral Authority, the Electoral Commission, to hold that referendum. But the president is manipulating the nature of this election. He says it's a ratification of his presidency. It's a recall election. That's what it is. And so there's a lot of confusion as to the purpose of this election. And I think the president just wants to whip up his base again. He wants to enthuse Mexicans and get them to support him again. He wants to portray, this is Darth Vader against the forces of light and good. And, we're on this great battle again, and you're being called again to the polls to show your support for my project and the right people and because he loves this kind of polarization. So he's playing this game again. My expectation is that eventually, I guess, INE will conduct this exercise with few resources. It will not cover the entire territory, not in the natural way that we have elections in Mexico every 3 years or so, and every 6 years, which cover all the territory. It's going to be just here and there, and then a few people will show up, and it'll be another fiasco. And the president will be disappointed again, and he'll try again to do some other gimmick, some other trick, some other show, political theater again in the future to try to get his base enthused again and probably prepared for 2024. And it's unfortunate because it's very distracting, but that's what I expect to happen.
And finally, how about the binational relationship? The border is open again, as we mentioned, although, as you said, not every fully vaccinated Mexican is able to cross because they have vaccines that have not received approval from the World Health Organization. So what we expect that this is going to do, I guess, for the economists in the border, for the economy in general, and the binational relationship?
Well, it's a really good question. I think at the border, things look better. I mean, people are beginning to cross.
My mom is excited to pick me up at the airport. Let's just say that's very important.
Yeah, well, I mean, you and I hail from the border, right? Different parts of the border, but we hail from the borderlands, and I think our families are going to be able to come and go as they wish, our friends, and on and on, but only those who are rightly vaccinated, right? And so, but I think. The economic activity will flourish again. People will continue to come and go. Tourism will slowly recover. I think Biden, by canceling the building of the wall early in 2021, sent a good signal. I feel that the mood itself is already changed on the border by the sheer fact that he said no more wall. That already kind of created a new optimism. The reopening, even if it's partial, kind of creates additional optimism. And of course, trade is booming. That has not stopped. And that continues to create jobs and kind of stimulate the local economy. And of course, I think at the end of the day, things look good from the border. There's more cooperation on the ground. But at the binational level, I think immigration will continue to pester the relationship. There'll be a lot of fires to put out when it comes to USMCA implementation. Lawyers are going to make a lot of money on that. And of course, I think security, Mexico will continue to drag its feet and pay the price. Because Mexico says, look, we need you to stop the guns going into Mexico, And the consumption problem is a problem. You participate. Look, co-responsibility has already been acknowledged by the United States. Everybody knows in this country that we play a part. I think it's a sphere with two half spheres, right? The U.S. plays a part. But look, it's in Mexico's interest to do its own job, and I think the president has neglected to do that. He doesn't want to confront organized crime. And so by now, within, I think, 2022, the president is going to have as many deaths by violence and crime in Mexico as Calderon, his arch enemy, had in the entire 6 years. So I think it's a failure of the president to provide safety and security for Mexicans, and he, with the excuse that the U.S. is not doing its part, it's not stopping the guns, he doesn't want to do anything. I think he overlearned the lessons of the Calderon administration, and he's not going to move a finger. And I think Mexicans will continue to pay a price, unfortunately. So I don't expect much there, but those issues are going to continue to pester the binational relationship through 2022.
Well, Tony Payan, Director for the Center for the United States and Mexico, thank you for answering these questions and about what happened in 2021 and what we can expect about 2022. And let me tell you, it was 30 minutes, but I asked you too many questions. So
I'm sorry. But look, we're covering 2 years, right?
Yes, it's a lot. It's a lot. So
Okay.
Thank you so much for answering these questions.
All right. Thank you, Enrique. Thank you, and have a great end of the year.
That was Tony Payan. That is it for this episode. Thank you for listening to the Judy Lee Allen Mexico Center podcast. Thanks to Lisa Wakata, our program manager, and to Tony Payan, the director of the Center for the United States and Mexico at Rice University's Baker Institute for Public Policy. Special thanks to Judy Lee Allen for her generous support of the work we do at the center. You can visit our website at bakerinstitute.org/Mexico, where you can find our latest publications. Views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the guests and the host, and do not necessarily reflect those of the center. If you have any comments or suggestions, you can email us at usmexicocenter@rice.edu. We would love to hear from you. Mexico Centered is available on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, Radio Public, and Spotify. You can subscribe through your favorite podcast app to receive all of our new episodes directly on your phone. I am Enrique Quesada. Happy holidays. Get your booster shot if you haven't, and I will see you next year.